On a family cruise, my daughter spent 3 hours waiting alone in the hot sun while the rest of the family went on a private excursion without her. They acted like it was no big deal. Then she said, "Will you do what you promised?" I said, "Yes." By dinner, the whole family was in complete panic mode. My name's Emily Winters. I'm 34 years old. The cruise ship was supposed to be a fresh start, 5 days of forced family fun on the Caribbean Sea, a floating monument to my mother's desperate wish that we could all just get along. I'd convinced myself, leaning on the flimsy railing as the Florida coastline shrank behind us, that this time would be different. A new leaf, not for me and certainly not for my sister, but for Hazel, my daughter. My husband, Mark Winters, squeezed my hand, the familiar pressure a silent promise. "We can handle this," his look said, and I tried to borrow some of his steady confidence. Hazel, who is 11, stood a little behind us, a small, quiet satellite in our orbit. She clutched the straps of her new backpack, a vibrant turquoise canvas against her simple t-shirt. She had that look on her face, the one she gets around my extended family, a polite, guarded smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a look I knew too well. It was the face of a child who had learned early that belonging was conditional. Inside her backpack was a special reusable water bottle, a bright blue one we'd bought just for this trip. It had a complicated flip-top straw and a little compass on the lid. She'd filled it herself at the water fountain just before we boarded, a small ritual of preparation. It was more than a bottle, it was her security blanket, a tangible piece of home in a sea of uncertainty. The ship was a chaotic symphony of screaming children, blaring pop music, and the relentless cheer of the activities crew. Up by the pool, my older sister, Monica Pierce, was already holding court. She was reclined on a lounge chair, sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara, with her son, Logan Pierce, who is 9, glued to her side. She waved when she saw us, a big, theatrical gesture that was more for the audience of strangers than for us. It was a performance, and as always, she was the star. My mom was there too, her face a mask of determined cheerfulness. She bustled over, smoothing the front of my shirt as if I were still a child. "Isn't this wonderful?" she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "All of us together." It sounded less like a question and more like a command, a directive we were all expected to follow. I just nodded, the lie catching in my throat. Wonderful wasn't the word I would have chosen. Necessary, maybe, tolerable, I hoped, but wonderful, not a chance. The main event of the trip, the shimmering centerpiece of this whole forced fun experiment, was the sea turtle snorkeling excursion in the Bahamas. Hazel had talked about it for weeks, ever since I'd shown her the brochure. She'd checked out books from the library, watched documentaries, and drawn picture after picture of loggerheads and green sea turtles gliding through turquoise water. We'd booked it months in advance, paying extra to guarantee our spots. It was the one thing she was truly, unreservedly excited for, the one part of this trip that felt like it was just for her. At the chaotic family breakfast in the ship's main dining hall, the air thick with the smell of bacon and syrup, Monica made a big deal about the special wristbands for the excursion. They were laid out on the table like party favors. "Logan is just so excited," she kept saying, ruffling his hair. She held up a bright yellow band, ignoring Hazel, who was sitting right next to her, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. My nephew, Logan, just grunted, his attention fixed on the tiny screen of his handheld video game. The wristbands were a bright, almost neon yellow, a clear marker of who belonged. I picked one up and fastened it around Hazel's slim wrist myself. The solid plastic clicked shut, a sound of finality. "This is your ticket to see the turtles," I told her, giving her a small wink. She traced the band with her finger, a tiny, genuine smile finally appearing on her face. For a moment, my hopes lifted. Maybe this would be okay after all. Before we could leave, my mom pulled me aside near the clattering busing station. "Emily, please," she said in a low, urgent voice, "make sure today goes smoothly. Monica's been stressed with work." It was the usual speech, the one I'd been hearing in various forms my whole life. It was my job to manage my sister's feelings, to smooth over her sharp edges, to keep the peace at all costs. The cost, I was beginning to realize, was almost always paid by me, or worse, by my daughter. Mark and I had a brief, last-minute meeting with the cruise coordinator. It was a mandatory safety briefing for all the adults chaperoning the larger group of kids on other tour later in the week. The meeting ran long and the coordinator was painstakingly thorough. It made us 5 minutes late to the excursion meetup on the dock. 5 minutes. We told Hazel to go ahead with Monica and Logan to meet them at the designated spot just past the gangway by the big blue sign. "We'll be right behind you," I promised, giving her a little nudge. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking toward her aunt who was already striding ahead, Logan in tow. I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring nod. That nod, that simple, thoughtless gesture would haunt me for years. It was the last moment of the life I used to live. When Mark and I finally got to the dock, the 5-minute delay had stretched to 10. The sun was blinding, bouncing off the white concrete and the turquoise water. The happy, chattering crowd for the turtle tour was gone. Far out in the channel, the tour boat was already pulling away from the pier, a white vessel leaving a churning wake behind it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I scanned the bustling dock, my eyes searching for Monica's bright red sun hat, for Logan's lime green swim shirt. I saw nothing, then I saw her, Hazel. She was standing alone by a pile of thick, coiled ropes, her shoulders slumped in a way that made her look impossibly small. She was clutching her blue water bottle to her chest like a shield. Her face, when she turned toward me, was flushed a painful, blotchy red from the brutal sun. We found out later from a sympathetic port worker that she'd been standing there for 3 hours. She hadn't wanted to leave the spot where I told her to wait in case we came looking for her. 3 hours in the blistering Bahamian heat. She wasn't crying, that was the worst part. There were no tears, no tantrum, just a profound and terrible exhaustion in her eyes. She looked tired, resigned, as if this was exactly what she had expected to happen all along. "They left," she said, and her voice was so small I could barely hear it over the squawking gulls. "Aunt Monica said there wasn't enough room." My gaze dropped to her wrist. The skin was bare. The yellow band, her ticket, her promise of a perfect day, was gone. In that instant, the fragile peace I'd been trying to maintain didn't just crack, it was obliterated. The status quo was a pile of ash at my feet. My only goal, my only thought, was getting my daughter away from the people who saw her as disposable. The confrontation I had spent a lifetime avoiding wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. I knelt in front of Hazel on that scorching pier, the concrete hot through the thin fabric of my pants, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. I didn't ask her for details. I didn't need them. I saw the entire, ugly story in her exhausted eyes, in the way she flinched when I reached out to touch her sunburned cheek. The truth was written all over her. All I asked was, "Are you okay?" She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a movement so slight I almost missed it. It wasn't convincing, but it was all she could manage. Mark was a storm cloud of fury beside me, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he fought for control. He was already pulling his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over Monica's contact number. I put my hand on his arm and shook my head, a silent plea, "Not yet, not like this." As we walked back toward the massive, indifferent cruise ship, Hazel's small hand tucked in mine, she asked the question that changed everything. Her voice was quiet, but the words were weighted with the gravity of 100 smaller hurts. "Are you going to do what you promised?" The promise. We'd made it a year ago, sitting in our car after a disastrous family birthday party where Hazel's gift from my parents was a hastily regifted scented candle, clearly forgotten, while Logan had received a mountain of expensive toys. I had seen the same resigned look on her face that day, and something inside me had snapped. I promised her, with Mark as my witness, that we were done. If my family ever made her feel like a guest again, like an outsider, like she was less than, we would walk away. No discussion, no smoothing it over, no second chances. Yes, I said. The word was solid, a piece of steel in my throat. It tasted like freedom and grief all at once. Yes, we are. In that moment, the vacation was over. The family I had been so desperately trying to hold together with tape and good intentions was no longer my problem. My only mission, my sole purpose on this earth was my daughter. Everything else was just noise. We didn't go back to our cabin. The thought of being trapped on that floating city with them was suffocating. We went straight to the guest services desk, a long, polished counter manned by people with relentlessly cheerful smiles. While Hazel sat quietly in a plush chair sipping a cup of water, Mark spoke to a concierge. He booked us a hotel on the island for the night, a nice one with a real pool and powerful air conditioning, no questions asked. I ordered milkshakes and a giant platter of French fries from a boardwalk cafe, Hazel's ultimate comfort food. We sat on the hotel balcony, the cool evening breeze a balm on our skin. In the distance, the cruise ship was a galaxy of twinkling lights, a floating palace of people we no longer had to answer to. It looked foreign and far away, like it belonged to someone else's life. While Hazel took a nap in the cool, quiet hotel room wrapped in a fluffy white robe, Mark and I made our next move. This wasn't about anger anymore, it was about logistics. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen from our daughter. On his laptop, Mark found a local company that ran private snorkeling charters, just the three of us. A captain, a boat, and a quiet cove known for its sea turtles. No crowds, no family, no drama. The cost was $1,287, an absurd amount of money. A year ago, I would have agonized over it. Mark didn't even hesitate. He entered his credit card information and booked it for the next morning. It was the first tangible act of our new life, spending money not to appease my family but to heal my own. This wasn't just a reaction. It was the creation of a new rulebook. Our family's well-being came first and the cost was irrelevant. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner and a swim in the blissfully empty hotel pool, we returned to the ship to sleep. My phone, which I'd left in our cabin, had 17 missed calls and a flood of text messages. Most of the calls were from my mom, with a few angry-looking ones from Monica. The texts were a chaotic jumble of demands and questions. I remembered then, with a cold jolt, that Mark and I had been scheduled as the required chaperones for two of the next day's big family outings. The zipline tour for the teenagers and the kids' club beach party for the younger ones. The cruise line had strict safety rules, one adult for every 4 kids under 16. Our extended family group was large and they had counted on us to make the numbers work. Without us, their ratio was shot. Without us, their plans were ruined. Mark took my phone and with a grim sort of satisfaction sent a single simple text to the family group chat. It was a masterpiece of corporate, emotionless language. Emily and I will no longer be available to chaperone any family activities for the remainder of the cruise. Please adjust your plans accordingly. The response was immediate, a digital explosion. The first text was from Monica. What? We need you for the zip line. The kids will be devastated. You can't do this. Then my phone rang. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text from her appeared. Emily, what is going on? You need to call me immediately. You can't just back out. You're ruining the trip for everyone. I didn't answer. I just read the messages, a cold, clear sense of calm settling deep in my bones. The chaos was happening somewhere else on another plane of existence. It couldn't touch us here. The loss for them was immediate and financial, and they were making it known. My first move wasn't a half measure or a warning shot. It was a clean, sharp cut. My options hadn't narrowed. I had already chosen the only one that mattered. The family chat lit up like a fireworks display on the 4th of July. Every ping of my phone was another explosion of indignation. My cousin, David Collins, the father of 2 teenagers, was the first to spell out the real issue. What do you mean adjust our plans? The zipline is non-refundable. That's over $1,000 down the drain. What are we supposed to tell the kids? Another aunt chimed in almost immediately. The kids' club party is canceled. They just told us they won't let the younger kids go without enough adults. They're all crying. This is a disaster. The numbers started flying. Soon, a consensus was reached. The total cost of the ruined excursions came out $3,104. The number was repeated over and over in the chat, typed out in angry capital letters as if it were a weapon they could use to beat me into submission. Their narrative was already being written in real time, right there on my phone screen. My oversensitivity was costing everyone. I was selfish. I was dramatic. I was ruining everything. I scrolled through the frantic, angry messages, my thumb moving mechanically over the glass. There were dozens of them. And in all that digital ink, in all that fury and financial panic, not one person asked about Hazel. Not one person typed the simple question, "What happened?" Their focus was solely, completely on their own inconvenience and their lost money. The implication was sickeningly clear. Hazel's well-being, her very existence, was worth less than a non-refundable deposit. Mark took the phone from my hand and muted the group chat. "Let them scream into the void," he said, his voice flat. He was right. We had escaped their orbit, but now we were the villains in a story being written without us, a story where a little girl's heart was just collateral damage. My mom, unable to reach me, resorted to calling Mark's phone. He looked at me, raising an eyebrow, and I nodded. He answered and put her on speaker, placing the phone on the small table between us. "Mark, thank God." "I don't know what's gotten into Emily," she said, her voice tight with a familiar, strained frustration. "She's not answering my calls. She needs to stop this nonsense and apologize to Monica." "Apologize for what, Carol?" Mark asked. He used her first name, something he rarely did, and his voice was dangerously calm. It was the voice he used when he was truly, deeply angry. For her daughter being abandoned on a dock for 3 hours? There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of static-filled silence. "Well, that's not what happened," Mom said, her tone defensive. "Monica said Hazel didn't want to go, that she was feeling shy and gave her spot to Logan." The lie was so blatant, so predictable, it barely registered as a shock. It was exactly what I expected. Of course, Monica had a story ready. She always did. "You need to fix this, Emily," Mom pleaded, her voice now directed at me as if she knew I was listening. "You're tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding. Think of the children. All the other children are so upset." She wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to manage the fallout. Her job, as she had defined it for herself decades ago, was to smooth the edges, to push the ugliness back under the rug where no one had to look at it. Her pressure, her desperate need for everything to appear perfect, confirmed what I already knew deep down. The problem was wider than Monica. It was a systemic rot, and my mom was the one who kept it from being exposed to the light. The stakes sharpened in that moment. This was a fight not just for my daughter, but against the entire family system that enabled her pain. The next morning, as we were getting ready for our private turtle tour, an email from Monica arrived in my inbox. The subject line was chilling in its corporate formality. "Costs incurred due to canceled plans." I opened it, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. It was formatted like an invoice, a spreadsheet practically. There were itemized lines for the zipline tickets, the beach party fees, even a ridiculous charge for a non-refundable cabana rental I didn't even know they'd booked. She had attached screenshots of the booking confirmations with the prices circled in a passive-aggressive red digital pen. It was a monument to her own pettiness, but it was the last line item that made my blood run cold. It read, "Emotional toll on Logan, devastation and disappointment. Priceless." Below that, a final, stunningly audacious demand: "Please remit payment for your share of the financial damages immediately." There was no mention of Hazel. No apology, not even a fake one, no acknowledgement whatsoever of what she had done on that dock. This was her strategy. She was trying to reframe her own cruelty as a business transaction where I was the one in debt. It was a declaration of war disguised as a spreadsheet. It was the most Monica thing she had ever done, and it was the biggest mistake she could have made. She had no idea that when it came to documentation, I was the one holding all the receipts. I didn't reply to the whole family. I didn't engage in the screaming match in the group chat. I composed one single email. I sent it directly to Monica and I copied my mom and dad. The subject line was simple: Ray. Your email. The body of the email contained only one sentence. Here is the information you seem to be missing. Then came the attachments. Attachment number 1, a photo I'd taken of Hazel on the dock after we found her. It was time-stamped. It showed her small, slumped figure, her face flushed and miserable, with the tour boat a tiny speck in the background. The timestamp clearly showed it was hours after the boat's scheduled departure. Attachment number 2. A photo of the note a deckhand had given us. His name was Evan Brooks, a kind young man with concerned eyes who had seen Hazel waiting. When we'd gone back to the pier to ask questions, he'd written it down for us, wanting to help. His note was short and damning. Yellow wristband 7 Hazel Winters was removed and reassigned to Logan Pierce by Monica Pierce at 12:15 p.m. He'd even signed it. Attachment number 3. A screenshot of the text message I'd sent Monica that morning, telling her we were running 5 minutes late from the safety briefing but would be right there. It proved we had every intention of going, that we hadn't simply failed to show up. I didn't add any commentary, I didn't add any emotion. I let the cold, hard facts speak for themselves. This was the first hard proof that their story, the neat and tidy lie my mom had so readily believed, was a complete fabrication. I hit send, and the little swoosh sound from my phone felt like striking a match. In that moment, I burned the bridge. There was no going back to pretending. I was committing to the truth, no matter how ugly it was and no matter who it took down with it. I expected a firestorm. I braced myself for a barrage of angry calls and defensive emails. Instead, there was silence. But my phone did buzz. Within 10 minutes of sending the email, I received a private message. It was from my cousin, Amber Collins. Her text was hesitant, as if she were afraid of being seen. Emily, I'm so sorry, it read. I saw what Monica did. I was standing right there. I tried to say something, to ask her what was going on, but she told me to mind my own business. She said you were being difficult. I feel awful that I didn't do more. A moment later, another message. This one from Kelly Morgan, another cousin. We saw Hazel standing there all alone. We asked Monica if she was okay, and she told us that Hazel wasn't really a cousin and didn't care about turtles anyway. She said she was doing her a favor. We knew it was wrong, but everything happened so fast. They were scared to speak up in the main chat, to contradict Monica in a public forum. But they were willing to tell me the truth in private. It was the first reveal, the first crack in the family's united front. I wasn't alone. Other people saw the cruelty. They were just too intimidated by my sister and the relentless family pressure to say anything out loud. Their messages were a lifeline. They validated what I already knew and proved that the lie my mom was peddling wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a conscious, collaborative effort to protect Monica. My fight wasn't just my own anymore. It was a truth that was starting to fracture the family's perfect facade from the inside out. The family chat, which had been a raging inferno just hours before, went completely silent. My email had been a bomb and no one knew how to handle the shrapnel. Monica didn't respond. My mom didn't call back. My dad, a man who had made a career out of avoiding conflict, remained predictably invisible. The lack of an apology was its own answer. It was a confession in the form of silence. They weren't sorry they did it, they were just sorry they got caught with undeniable proof. This silence was different from the lulls in other family dramas. It wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the stunned, airless quiet of an army whose supply lines had been cut. My facts had systematically dismantled their fiction. They had no defense against a time-stamped photo and a signed witness statement. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the oversensitive one, I was the one with evidence. We spent the rest of the day on our private charter. The boat was small, the captain a quiet man who pointed out landmarks and let us be. When we found the turtles, it was magical. They were huge, graceful creatures gliding through the water with an ancient calm. It was just the three of us in the water, away from everyone. Hazel's face when she broke the surface after watching one swim right beneath her was transformed. She was beaming, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire being. It was the first one I'd seen in days. It was pure joy. That smile was my pivot. It was the only thing worth fighting for, the only thing that mattered in the wreckage of my old life. That evening, Mark ran into Evan Brooks, the deckhand, at one of the ship's coffee shops. He was off duty, reading a book. Evan recognized Mark and waved him over, his expression troubled. "Hey," he said, closing his book. "I'm glad I ran into you. There's something else you should probably know about that snorkeling trip." Mark sat down and Evan leaned in, lowering his voice. It wasn't just that Monica had given Logan the spot. The snorkeling tour had a special junior marine biologist package. It was an add-on, something extra that came with a waterproof underwater camera and a special guide who would teach the kids about the coral reef. It was only available for kids aged 10 and older. Logan, my nephew, was 9. Hazel was 11. Monica had used Hazel's registration with her correct age to get the spot on the tour. Then, at the check-in, she had argued with the tour operators, insisting that Logan be given the upgraded package. She claimed he was exceptionally mature for his age and that it was his birthday wish. They had eventually given in just to move the line along. This new piece of information landed like a punch to the gut. It flipped everything. This wasn't a spontaneous act of favoritism or a moment of poor judgment in the chaos of the dock. This was premeditated deception. She had intentionally used my daughter's name and age to get something for her son that he didn't even qualify for. Hazel wasn't just left behind. She was used as a tool, a placeholder, and then discarded the moment she was no longer useful. Armed with this new, sickening information, I did something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I called my mom. I had to. I had to know how deep the rot went. I told her everything Evan had said. I laid out the calculated nature of the deception, the lies, the use of my daughter as a pawn in Monica's selfish game. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, thick with unspoken things. When she finally spoke, her voice was a faint whisper. She just loves her son so much, Emily. She wants him to have the best of everything. The excuse was so pathetic, so utterly inadequate that I almost laughed. At Hazel's expense, I asked, my own voice dangerously quiet, "Is that the family rule now?" Hazel's place is to be the stepping stone for Logan. And then came the admission that broke the last fragile thread holding me to her. "I've told you for years, Emily, you need to let the little things go. It's easier for everyone. It keeps the peace." She admitted it. She knew this wasn't a one-time thing. She had been actively pressuring me to accept my daughter's mistreatment for years. Keeping the peace was just a pretty little phrase for enabling abuse. This was the ultimate betrayal. My own mother had chosen her role as a family peacekeeper over her role as a grandmother. She had chosen the illusion of a happy family over the actual happiness of her own granddaughter. The irreversible choice was made for me. There was no relationship left to save here. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and ended the call. I looked at Mark, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. "It's over," I said. My goal was no longer to get an apology or to make them understand. That was a fool's errand. My goal was to get out, completely. I took out my phone and with a steady hand I blocked Monica's number. Then I went to her social media pages and blocked her on every platform. It was a swift, silent, digital excision. I sent one final text to my mom. "Our relationship is on hold until you understand that keeping the peace was just another word for enabling abuse. Do not contact me until you are ready to talk about that." The personal cost felt immense. In the space of one evening, I was severing ties with my only sister and my mother. I was an orphan of my own choosing, but the goal was now bolder, riskier, and crystal clear. I wasn't just leaving a vacation. I was demolishing the old, toxic structure of my family and building a new one from the ground up. And the first rule of this new family was simple. The only people allowed in were the ones who saw my daughter as a person, not a placeholder. As if on cue, a new message notification appeared on my phone's lock screen. It was from a number I didn't recognize at first. It was from Diana Pierce, Monica's own teenage daughter. "Aunt Emily, this is Diana," the text read. "I know what my mom did, it's not okay. I heard her on the phone with Grandma bragging about how she got Logan the camera." Another message followed immediately. "I know she lies about this stuff all the time, she does it to me too. Amber and Kelly told me they messaged you, we're on your side, all of us." It was a crack of light in the suffocating darkness. The younger generation, they saw the truth. They weren't blinded by decades of keeping the peace. They knew right from wrong. This wasn't just my fight, it was theirs too. My new, smaller family circle was already starting to form right there in the ashes of the old one. This single text message confirmed that my new goal was not just necessary but possible. The next day, the last day of the cruise, as the ship churned its way back toward Florida, Diana made her move. She posted a photo on her Instagram story. It wasn't a dramatic, angry picture. It was a sweet one, a photo of her and Hazel from a previous Christmas, both of them wearing silly reindeer antlers and smiling for the camera. But the caption was a bomb. It read, "This is my cousin Hazel. I love her. I'm sick of certain family members treating her like she's disposable. What happened on this trip was cruel and it's not the first time. She deserves better." She didn't name Monica, she didn't have to. Everyone in our interconnected web of relatives knew exactly who and what she was talking about. The family drama was now public. It had escaped the confines of our private chats and tense emails and was now playing out for an audience of hundreds. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments and replies from extended family and curious family friends. "What happened? Diana, you should take this down, this is private. Good for you for speaking up." The carefully constructed image of our perfect family was cracking under the weight of a teenager's honest testimony. With that one post, I lost the illusion of privacy. Now everyone we knew had an opinion and they weren't afraid to share it. The family fractured along predictable lines, the cracks spreading rapidly. My Uncle Robert, my mom's brother, called me, his voice booming with fury. "You've got your niece fighting your battles for you online? This is a disgrace, Emily. You're airing our dirty laundry for the whole world to see." He hung up before I could even respond. Monica's defenders, the family members who benefited from her brand of narcissistic generosity, rallied in the comments on social media and in their own private chats. They called Diana disrespectful and a dramatic teenager looking for attention. They insisted it was all a huge misunderstanding that I had blown out of proportion. But then, others pushed back. Amber and Kelly posted heart emojis in support of Diana's post. Another cousin wrote a public comment, "Diana is telling the truth, it's been happening for years." The battle lines were drawn, there was no middle ground left. You were either on the side of truth or the side of silence. I didn't participate. I didn't comment or post a single word. I just watched as the consequences of my choice rippled outwards, a shockwave I had started but could no longer control. The division was now a permanent public record. This was no longer something that could be ignored or smoothed over when we got back to shore. I sent a private message to Diana. "Thank you, you are incredibly brave," she replied instantly. "I learned from you." Then the campaign started, small, insidious, like a slow leak in a boat you don't notice until you're waist deep in cold water. It wasn't one big explosion so much as 1,000 quiet poisonings. Monica called my Aunt Sarah and spun a story. I was having a breakdown. I'd always been jealous of her. I was making Hazel into a project and weapon. Sarah called me that afternoon, voice tight with worry. "Emily, Monica said you're unwell," she said. "She sounded scared for you." I could hear the implication dangling between us. Unstable mothers don't get custody of the narrative. That was only the first thread. Monica started telling other relatives that Hazel was a troubled child, that she came from difficult beginnings, and that her behavior was the real reason she'd been left behind. She told them I was strict and controlling, that I used Hazel's adoption as a shield to demand sympathy. She gave her version of events with performance-grade outrage, and people who had never met Hazel nodded because it was easier to believe a clear villain than to look for the messy truth. It spread into voicemail and kitchen table gossip. I heard from distant cousins who'd once been friendly but now called from across state lines to ask if I was okay, their voices hushed like they were checking for a fever. "Is Mark supporting you?" they'd whisper. "Do you need anything?" That patronizing concern was a weapon in itself. Monica was reshaping the story to make everyone feel pity for her and contempt for me. The worst was how easily it worked on people who hadn't been there. People trust the loudest voice, and Monica was a professional at loudness. She'd built an image of herself as the generous, bright aunt who always organized birthday parties. That image bought her a lot of forgiveness. She started to isolate us by poisoning individual wells, calling a friend of ours and saying we'd been erratic on the trip, texting a childhood neighbor that I was making mountains out of molehills. The aim was obvious. Make me look unstable, and the rest of the family would slowly pull away. Then Mom called, frantic. "Emily, you need to tell Diana to take that post down," she said before I could say hello. "Her father is furious. You don't understand what you've stirred up." The panic in her voice sounded less like worry for family unity and more like fear for the social cost. "This has to stop now." I realized in that moment that Monica couldn't win by logic. She needed emotional control. If she couldn't get us to apologize, she would make sure we were embarrassed into silence. The smear campaign was the lever she pulled to bend the rest of the family back into line. Aunt Sarah ended up calling me back with a warning. "They're going to try to make you the crazy one," she said. "They're telling people you can't be trusted with children." I don't believe them, but others might. Her voice held sorrow. She'd always liked Monica and didn't want to choose sides. That was how Monica won, by making people believe choosing the truth demanded more risk than they could stomach. Then the real threat arrived, and it came not from Monica's voice but from Mom's, calm and cold in a way that cut deeper. I had unblocked her hoping for a human moment, a return to the woman who used to tuck my hair behind my ear. Instead, she called to issue an order. "You need to tell Diana to take that post down, now," she said. Her tone wasn't pleading. It was a command wrapped in a thin, sweet-sounding voice. "Her father is furious." "Do this for the family," I bristled. "Mom, Diana didn't make this happen. Monica did." There was a pause. I could hear a faint clink of something in the background, the sound of someone arranging dishes for a meal, the domestic sounds of someone who wanted everything neat. "I helped pay for this cruise, Emily," she said finally. "A significant amount. I did it on one condition." I waited, the air in my chest tight. "One condition?" "I told Monica I would help if she made sure this trip was special for Logan. He's been having a hard time with his classes. I wanted him to have a good memory." Her voice tried to make it sound like concern. "I assumed it would be harmless." It landed like weight. Not only had Mom looked the other way, she'd actively funded the circumstances that made Logan a priority. She'd tied money to a plan that put Hazel at risk. That idea that my mother had, with a checkbook and a smile, given permission for a child to be sidelined, made my stomach turn hot with betrayal. She wasn't the mediator, she was a financer of the exclusion. "Mom," I said slowly, careful to keep my voice from turning brittle, "you didn't just help. You set the terms. You made priority choices that put Hazel second. You asked Monica to make her son the center. Do you understand how that reads?" There was a long silence. Then, almost inaudible, she said, "I thought it would be easier this way. I thought if Monica felt supported, it would keep things from exploding. I didn't think she would leave a child alone." "That's exactly the point," I said. "You were choosing an image over a person." Her response was defensive in a way that had stopped surprising me. "You're being dramatic," she said weakly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We were trying to make a nice trip. We were at different moral addresses. She saw a broken plan, I saw deliberate harm that she'd bought into. The conversation didn't end with a reconciliation. Instead, it pulled the last fragile thread from me. When I hung up, I felt something inside me break and reorder itself. This wasn't a fight I could win by pleading for understanding or by dragging the truth into the open and waiting for people to see it. Mom had told me, in effect, that she'd prefer the family's comfort and appearance to the safety of her granddaughter. That realization was my crucible. I made the choice with a steadiness I surprised myself with. I removed Mom's number from my phone. I didn't just block Monica anymore, I blocked my mother too. It felt strange and final, like ripping a bandage off a wound that had been infected for years. I sent one last text before I cut the line. Our relationship is on hold until you understand that keeping the peace is a euphemism for enabling harm. Do not contact me until you are ready to put Hazel first. Then I hit the delete key and felt the small, sharp relief of a chapter closed. It was terrifying and also strangely clean. The loss was immediate. Every childhood picture that included Mom and Monica felt like evidence I had to separate myself from, but a new sense of focus came in the space they left. I was no longer negotiating the terms of my daughter's acceptance with people who'd decided her place. The flight home was a quiet, blue-sky ache. We sat in a row, 3 seats for the people who mattered most to me. Mark watched the window like a man thinking about return to normal, while Hazel curled against my shoulder and dozed, the steady rise and fall of her breathing a small, perfect rhythm. I stared at the clouds and let myself plan. It had to be more than silence and blocking numbers. That would let them continue telling a story in which I was the villain. I wanted a statement that wasn't about vengeance and wasn't passive. I wanted a life that made the choice public and joyful, one that proved what family could be when you chose people who saw each other. I'm going to host a barbecue, I told Mark, voice low because the plane was hushed. A family barbecue for the people who actually showed up when it mattered. He turned and looked at me, curiosity knitting his brow. You mean like invite people over? Exactly, I said. Invite Amber, Kelly, Diana, Aunt Sarah, and anyone else who messaged or reached out. Invite the cousins who said they'd stand with us. Not Monica, not Mom, not Dad. Not anyone who painted Hazel as less. Mark's jaw tightened, then relaxed into a smile that felt like a promise. I think that's a great idea. It'll send a message without you having to argue. We sketched it out in air, little logistics unfolding. A backyard, folding chairs, a grill lit by Mark's steady hand, kids running on the lawn, adults who didn't have to weigh every comment. I imagined the sound of Hazel laughing without scanning the yard. I pictured Diana and her friends not as allies hiding in the shadows, but as part of a visible, chosen community. It was a risky move. Inviting people explicitly to exclude my family might fuel more gossip. Monica could show up uninvited and make a scene. Mom could try to use apologies as a ladder to climb back into our lives without doing the work, but risk is part of any honest action. If I wanted a family that honored Hazel, I had to create it where others could see it. I had to force the question, do you want to belong to this family or not? So the plan became practical. We'd send paper invitations, something tangible that said this was intentional. I'd ask Amber and Kelly to help set the tone to make sure the day felt warm and normal. We'd keep the guest list small and supportive. People who'd already proved they valued Hazel as Hazel, not as an idea. Mark would handle the food, hot dogs, burgers, a salmon for a few who liked it, and I'd handle the kids' activities so Hazel could pick what she wanted to do without asking permission. I let myself imagine how the day would go. A lawn full of shoes kicked off, a choir of cousins shouting, Aunt Sarah passing around a bowl of potato salad she insisted she wouldn't make but did anyway. If Monica wanted an audience for a confrontation, she would have to present herself to a group who had already chosen their side. That was a kind of finality I was willing to test. When we landed, I felt a small, dangerous buoyancy. It wasn't victory, not yet, but for the first time in a long time I had a map. I knew who I was protecting, who I wanted to keep, and what I was willing to lose. I had moved from reaction to plan. The barbecue would either cement our new life or expose every fragility I feared. Either way, we were no longer waiting for permission to belong. We were building a place where belonging was earned through care, not inherited through silence. The invitations went out like a small, brave ripple. The yesies came back slow at first, then steadied into a little chorus. Amber, Kelly, Diana, Aunt Sarah, a couple of cousins I hadn't seen in years who wrote things like, "Count us in, we won't miss it." The relief at those replies was real, but it didn't cancel the ache. Walking through my house after I sent the last invitation felt like moving through someone else's memories. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, me and Monica with sunburned noses from a beach trip when we were 10. Mom holding me at my high school graduation. I kept thinking of the bright yellow wristband and how it had been taken off Hazel's arm like it didn't belong there. Every image that used to be warm now carried a thin thread of betrayal. I caught myself reaching for the phone to call Mom to demand she fix things to make the world look the way it had before. The urge was almost reflexive, the same muscle memory that had kept me smoothing edges my whole life. Mark found me in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a dish towel, and he put his hand on my shoulder like an anchor. "You did the right thing," he said, and he meant it, but the words didn't make the hollow feeling go away. I missed the convenience of shared holidays and the excuse of bad behavior covered up with a laugh. Losing them felt like losing a limb I didn't know I'd been leaning on until it was gone. The grief was quieter than I expected. Not a wail, but a low, constant ache that hummed under everything I did. I tried to explain it to Aunt Sarah on the phone to make her see the arithmetic of small cruelties adding up to a life where my daughter didn't belong. Sarah listened, the pause between our words thick with regret. "I don't know how to fix this without tearing everyone apart," she said, and I realized that was the point. The family had always chosen image over repair. That choice had a cost, and now I was the one paying it. When the replies came in for the barbecue, they came with warmth and small offerings: a pie, 2 extra folding chairs, a kid's soccer ball. Those little practical things were balm. But at night, when the house grew quiet, the missing presence of my old family felt like a phantom limb I could still feel, an echo of arms that had once been there and now weren't. I didn't know I was crying until Hazel came up behind me and wrapped her small, still salty arms around my waist. She'd been listening at the doorway during one of my calls, the way kids do when they know grown-ups are saying things that will change their world. She sat beside me on the sofa afterward, knees tucked up, eyes huge and serious. For a long time, she only played with the edge of her blue water bottle, twisting the compass lid with the soft, nervous motion she'd always used when she was trying to think. Then she looked up, and the question came out in that thin, steady voice that carries more weight than its volume. "Is this my fault?" My throat closed. I had feared that question since the moment we found her on the dock. I'd thought about it in the nights when I woke with the salty taste of panic in my mouth. I pulled her into my lap and felt how small she still was, how much of the world she carried inside the weight of her shoulders. "No," I said at first, but my first answer felt too clean, too rehearsed. She tilted her head, not satisfied. "Did I make you lose your mom?" she asked, and the words hit me like a cold wind. That question went through me. I had imagined every possible consequence of my choice, but I hadn't imagined the way it would land on her, like a stone she might carry alone. For a horrible moment, I wondered if I had traded one kind of hurt for another, if in protecting her from being erased, I had somehow made her lose the very people she knew. The old fear that my efforts would be a cage instead of protection rose up and threatened to swallow me. "I need you to know something," I said, and I let my voice shake because it needed to be honest. "This is not your fault, it's mine." I didn't see it soon enough. I let small things slide because I wanted to keep peace, and peace turned out to mean that you paid the price. "I'm sorry I didn't do better sooner." She blinked, like the apology was a new object in the air and she was choosing how to take it. "You mean you did this for me?" she asked, like she couldn't quite believe it. I did this because I promised you I would, I said. I promised I'd keep you safe. That doesn't mean you'll never be hurt. It means I won't pretend the hurt didn't happen. Sometimes protecting someone means being the one people get mad at. That's the part that scares me more than anything, but I would choose you over peace any day. She was quiet for a long time, then she curled into my side and whispered, "Did I make you lose your mom?" "You didn't," I said. They chose what was more important to them. You didn't make decisions for anyone. You didn't take a choice away from them. They're the ones who decided who to protect. The words felt raw but true. She let out a small sigh and nestled into me like a practiced habit, the soft rhythm of her breathing grounding me. Then she surprised me. She lifted her head, looked me in the eyes with an intensity that broke through the fog in my chest and said, "I'm glad you're my mom." It wasn't planned or theatrical. It was a child's simple, fierce statement, and it landed in me with a force that made something unclench inside. My eyes blurred, but this time the tears felt less like loss and more like release. She hugged me so tight she made a small sound like someone who is finally allowed to stop holding their breath. "We'll make our people," she said, as if reciting a plan. "Not the kind you were born into, but the kind we pick." Her fingers dug into my shoulder like anchor points. "Can we do pizza and watch that turtle movie we love?" "Yes," I said, laughing through a sob, "we can do that. And next summer we'll go somewhere you choose." That hug and that tiny declaration were the pivot I'd been waiting for. The ache of what we were losing didn't vanish. It sat beside us like a weathered coat we couldn't throw away. But inside that cost was a seed of possibility. A life we could build that didn't demand negotiation at the expense of anyone's dignity. The day of the barbecue dawned clear and stubbornly ordinary, the kind of sky that makes you think maybe things could feel normal again. I felt that nervous, buzzing energy that comes before something important, like the way your stomach flips at the start of a school play. Mark handled the grill like a ritual. He takes pride in small, steady actions, while I set out folding chairs and hung a string of cheap, cheerful lights across the patio. There was the smell of charcoal and ketchup in the air, the low hum of a neighbor's lawn mower in the distance, and the soft thump of kids' shoes on the grass. Amber arrived with 2 coolers and a stack of paper plates, wearing a smile that suggested someone who had been waiting for this chance to breathe. Kelly walked in carrying a bowl of potato salad, a careful offering that felt like solidarity. Diana showed up with a camera phone already filled with photos she wanted to share, goofy faces, silly hats, candid shots of Hazel grinning, and she came with her father, who gave me a look that said he understood the gravity of what we'd done and was choosing to stand with us anyway. Aunt Sarah, bless her, arrived with the actual famous potato salad, the one that always got requested, and she set it down like a peace treaty no one else could bargain away. Hazel was the first real test of the new circle, and she passed with flying colors. She didn't hover, she moved to the center of whatever was happening. Kids trailed after her like planets around a small star. Diana, my cousin's children, and even a shy neighbor boy who came with his parents. They played tag, they stole slices of watermelon, they sat on the grass and tried to make up rules for an imaginary game. Hazel laughed, full and loud, the kind of unguarded sound I'd not heard from her in months. Each time she looked at me, she flashed a grin that said she knew this was ours now. Mark flipped burgers with a focused calm, joking with Amber's husband about baseball stats he didn't care about, keeping the mood light. I noticed small things that mattered. Someone offering Hazel the last burger before anyone else noticed, Diana bringing over a blanket for her to sit on, Aunt Sarah making a point to hand Hazel the first slice of pie. Those actions were tiny, but they were the opposite of the way we'd been treated by the others. They were inclusive, deliberate, and kind. I stood at the threshold of the back door for a moment, watching them all, feeling the tightness of the last months loosen. The backyard was smaller than any extended family gathering we'd ever had, but it felt bigger in the only way that mattered. It felt available. It felt safe. For the first time since the doc, I wasn't counting the cost of every interaction. I was counting the laughs, the sticky fingers, the way Hazel's hair bounced when she ran. This was the new circle, chosen and honest, and as I watched them, I felt something settle in me that was quieter than victory but kinder. A steady, hard-won piece. The doorbell rang and the sound sliced through the backyard like a sudden gust. Conversation cut off mid-laughter. Kids skidded to a stop in the grass. For a breath, everyone looked at me, waiting. My stomach did a little flip that felt exactly like the one I'd had on the dock, only sharper. I wiped my hands on a towel, the fabric rough and oddly reassuring, and walked through the house with my heart loud in my throat. Through the peephole I saw them. Monica, hands on her hips, the same set jaw she wore when she wanted to win an argument. Mom beside her, face pale but fixed in the stoic way she thought would sway people. They stood like a united front, two people who had decided they could demand an audience anywhere they wanted it. For a second I felt small, the way I had at every holiday as the one expected to smooth things over. But the backyard behind me was full of eyes that already belonged to something else, people who knew what mattered. I opened the door but stopped at the screen. I left it as a thin, visible barrier between our worlds. "Emily," Mom said, voice low and urgent, "we need to talk. This has gone on long enough." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, and the voice was steadier than I felt. It was the voice I'd practiced like a shield on the ship. Calm, final. "You left a child alone on a dock. Family doesn't do that." Monica's mouth twisted. "You can't just cut us out," she hissed. She leaned toward the screen as if proximity would lend authority. "We are your family." "No," I said, eyes hard. "You're not. Family doesn't use a child to get what she wants. Family doesn't erase someone who sits at the table. Family doesn't reassign a child's ticket to her cousin and pretend nothing happened." It felt strange to say those things out loud with people hearing from just beyond the patio. I wanted to list the facts, the time-stamped photo, Evan's note, the text I'd sent, but the truth had already been said. The wristband was the simple symbol, it told the whole story. Monica's entitlement had been reduced to a yellow plastic loop, and that loop had changed everything. "You made a choice," I kept going, because there was no use letting the moment soften. "You chose to take Hazel's wristband. You chose to let her stand in the sun. Choices have consequences. You are not welcome in our home. You are not welcome in our lives. Goodbye." Monica's eyes flashed. "You're overreacting. You're punishing us for one mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Mom cut in as if she could rescue Monica with a softer lie. "You have to understand." "I understand that you chose image over a child," I said. I pushed the screen door a hair closed to signal the end of the conversation without making a spectacle of slamming metal. My hand shook for a second, but my voice didn't. "You chose to make someone less so your son could have more. That's not something I can let into my house." Monica tried to step forward, and Dad, who'd been silent as he often was at the edges of our family storms, stood behind her like a shadow. I could see his hesitation, the way he'd been raised to not look. He didn't cross the threshold. That was for the best. I didn't want him in my house if he couldn't see the harm done. "You're making a big mistake," Monica snarled. She tried to appeal to the audience, to the people who had gathered to watch from chairs and windows, to shame me for choosing a child over blood. "After everything I've done for you, Emily. After all the help. You helped yourself," I said. "That's different." The words felt like gravel in my mouth, but they landed where they had to. Monica's composure broke then. The mask slipped and the raw, entitled anger beneath gleamed. "You ungrateful brat," she shouted, voice high and ugly. "You choose that kid over your own blood." The backyard turned quiet for a beat. A few of my guests came to the windows and then back out again. I could feel their looks, not of judgment but of appraisal. They were seeing the person I'd been protecting Hazel from. Monica's scream didn't land as an attack, it landed as proof. It showed who she was without the careful stories she'd used for years. Mom had nothing left to say. Her face had gone the color of pushed flour. She opened her mouth once, closed it, and then lowered her head. For the first time in my memory, she looked like someone who understood that there were consequences she hadn't wanted to pay. I didn't yell back. I didn't lunge. I didn't take another step toward the threshold. I closed the door gently. The screen made a soft click as metal met frame, a sound that was absurdly domestic for what it signified. I locked it, the old brass key turning with a satisfying final clunk that echoed through me. That lock was the small, ordinary action that held enormous meaning. It was the moment the choice became a boundary, physical and symbolic. I turned and walked back to the yard. The conversation that had been paused resumed where it had left off, kids shrieking with delight, grown-ups exchanging looks that said, "We're with you." Amber came over and hugged my shoulder, her face pressed to mine like an ally marking territory. Kelly brought a plate and set it down on the table without fanfare. Mark gave me a look that was part apology for the storm and part pride for how I'd stood in it. The decisive outcome wasn't Monica's screaming, it was the quiet click of the lock and the way my people kept eating and laughing in the space I had made. Monica and Mom lingered on the porch for a few more minutes, smaller somehow now that they'd been seen. Then they turned and walked away, leaving their footsteps on the sidewalk and their opinions behind them. The party continued. The children reclaimed the lawn, the music rose again, my new family kept being kind. That night, when I tucked Hazel into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck and didn't ask for permission to belong. 6 months later, Thanksgiving arrived the way small rebellions often do, quiet and stubborn, with a smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon that covers over the ache of sudden change. We weren't at Mom's house with the white tablecloth and the way every dish had to be arranged just so for appearances. We were at our place, which felt messy and honest. The guest list was the same small group who'd come to the barbecue. Amber, Kelly, Diana and her dad, Aunt Sarah, and a handful of cousins who had chosen to stand on the side of care. The house filled slowly. People carried casseroles, pies, and a mountain of good intentions. Amber took over the kitchen counter like she'd been doing it forever, chopping and stirring and chatting with Kelly. Diana sat at the kids' table and stuck paper turkey feathers into the cap of the shy neighbor boy, making him laugh until he forgot to be self-conscious. Aunt Sarah fussed over oatmeal cookies for the children and made sure Hazel had the biggest slice of pumpkin pie just because she could. Hosting felt different this time. There was no attempt to perform perfection, no whispering about who had to smile more at the camera. Everyone pitched in a way that felt effortless. Mark manned the stove and kept up his steady jokes, and I moved through the house passing plates and hugs. We set up a corner with board games and left the television off. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about choosing what to hold on to. At one point, Mom called, I didn't pick up. That felt strange, like a reflex muscle I'd used for 34 years had finally been given permission to rest. No one pressured me to answer. We were building our own rituals now. A Thanksgiving where gratitude meant more than keeping appearances. It was quieter, warmer, and messier than a rehearsal for everyone else's approval. It felt, honestly, like home. A few weeks later, a thin envelope arrived in our mailbox. I remember the day because it was a gray afternoon and Hazel was building a fort in the living room with blankets. I opened it while standing at the counter. It was a Christmas card from a distant great-aunt. The handwriting was old-fashioned and careful, the kind of note you send because your mother taught you to send things. It was addressed to Mark and Emily Winters. Hazel's name wasn't anywhere on it. A year before, that omission would have felt like a fresh cut. I would have called Mom, demanded an explanation, expected her to patch the hole with some version of care. This time, my reaction was quieter. There was a small flash of old hurt, a muscle memory now, but it didn't swell into anything I had to fix. I slid the card open just to see what it said. Polite holiday wishes, no mention of grandchildren. No sign the writer knew Hazel existed. I set it on the counter and then I walked to the recycling bin without dramatics. The act of tossing it was small and deliberate. It was an acknowledgement that some things belonged to a past I had chosen to leave. My peace was worth more than a card. The visible cost of boundary setting was there in little acts like this. A missing name on an envelope, a quiet absence at family milestones. The cost hurt, but it was a ledger that was easy to read. The lines were clear now. What we gave up was real, and so was what we gained. On a bright afternoon a few months later, our house thrummed with the kind of noise that has weight. Children ran in circles and then collapsed in heaps. Laughter bounced off the walls. I walked through the living room and found Hazel in the middle of a ring of kids, teaching them a complicated card game she loved. Her instructions were fierce and patient, her gestures animated. She was the center of gravity. No scanning of the room for approval, no standing at the edge waiting for permission. For a beat I was taken back to the dock, the white glare of the concrete, the small stooped figure clutching a blue water bottle. The contrast made my breath catch. This living room full of sticky fingers, exuberant voices, and a child who knows she belongs was the picture I had been fighting toward. It wasn't about revenge. The point had never been to make anyone suffer. It was about making sure my daughter never stood alone under a blistering sun again. Mark came up behind me and put his arms around my waist. We watched our daughter together. Hazel looked up, caught my eye, and gave me that huge, uncomplicated grin that used to feel rare. Then she turned back to her game, bossing the cousins around with delight. In her smile, in the ordinary chaos of our small, chosen family, I felt the shape of everything I'd done settle into something steady and true. Mark slid his arms around my waist from behind, and for a moment the world narrowed to the steady press of him, the warm weight of his hand, the sound of kids laughing like a bell. We watched Hazel together and she caught my eye and gave me that huge, uncomplicated grin she'd been practicing like homework. It wasn't a guarded flash. It was whole and unself-conscious, the kind of smile that says you're safe here and you belong. She went right back to the game, bossing her cousins with delight, and I realized I didn't need to scan the room anymore. I didn't have to count who was looking at her or measure every laugh. The old fear, the one that had sat behind my ribs since the dock, loosened. My revenge wasn't the lock on the door or the blocked numbers. It was this. A home where my girl can be loud, silly, messy, and adored without explanation. I had wanted to make them feel loss, yes, but the point was never to hurt people. It was to build a life where she never stood alone in the sun again. In her grin, I felt that victory, quiet, durable, absolute. If this story reached you, tell me about a time you chose peace over people-pleasing in the comments. Share your own story of building a family that protects you. If you liked this tale, subscribe for more narrated stories and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.